Well, thank you, everybody. I saw a massive crowd of people sort of flowing down the stairs about 5 minutes ago, and I thought I should try to stop them, but clearly I was unsuccessful. So I think what we'll do is ask each of these gentlemen to introduce themselves quickly. Maybe spend 3 minutes just giving our audience here a sense of what kind of loans you all write. Is it small business or consumer? Because we've got a mix. What are the sort of maturities? What kind of interest rates are your investors or lenders seeing? And maybe how many people are in your organization, if you care to talk about that, just so the audience has a sense of what the kinds of business that you're involved with. And then we'll go into sort of deeper dive questions. So Maurizio, would you care to start?
3 minutes of that, yeah? Okay.
I've got my watch going here. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Maurizio Sella, I'm the founder or chairman of Smartica, which is a peer-to-peer lending, so personal loans, consumer loans. We are a payment institution, so we are a fully licensed company, regulated by the Bank of Italy since 2012. We have about 10 people, 8 people full-time, but we have another various consultants that help us in technology, in credit process, and so on. So I would say we're about 15. Average APR on our loans is over 9.5% now. Average loan size 5 million. We granted so far 20 million euros for about 3,500 loans. And since we started to do a little bit of communication advertising, we had a massive increase of loan demand. So we are basically looking for lenders. So please come and see us.
Thanks, Maurizio.
I'm Toby, co-founder and CEO of Spotcap. We are an online provider of business loans in Spain, the Netherlands, and Australia. We launched Spain as our first market in September of last year, raising 13 million in our Series A. And we provide loans to small businesses, focusing on the short-term part of the curve, flexible durations from 1 to 12 months, which, coupled with the fact that we are an on-balance sheet lender, we view as by far the most attractive business model in alternative lending from a sort of risk-return perspective. So we're more focused on the higher risk, higher return type businesses with APRs certainly higher than what you just mentioned. But also, focusing on some of the more risky businesses. We see a lot of potential in Spain, and focusing right now on growing Spain, the Netherlands, and Australia.
Great.
I'm James Buckland, the CEO and founder of Loanbook, which is a Spanish business lending marketplace. We have 15 people. We focus, like Toby, we focus at the shorter end of the curve. 3, 6, 12, pushing out to 18, 24 months. Because of the nature of our investors, we're not a balance sheet lender, we're a marketplace lender. We're driven to a certain extent by local investor requirements, although we target professional institutional investors. Even those in Spain are relatively conservative, so our yields are between 4 and 8, I'd say, on average. But we push out to 10, 11, 12, according to the demand on the platform. We have 15 people. We've made about 5 million euros of loans, and we're averaging around 14, 15, 16 credits a month, looking to push out to 20 and 30 over the next 3 to 6 months.
Great.
Excellent. My name is Josep Nebot. I'm one of the co-founders of Arboribus. Arboribus is a crowdlending platform in Spain. We only do SMEs in loans of maturities from 1 to 5 years. We're starting to do 4 and 5 years from now on. Now we are 13 people in Spain. Our interest rates are between 6 and 7%, same as SMEs here approximately in UK. And we've done so far 4 million. Actually, we did the first loan to an SME in July 2013. So we've been 2 years and a half in the market, and since then we've done 4 million approximately.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm Michele Novelli. I'm the CEO of Prestiamoci. Prestiamoci is a personal loans marketplace in Italy. Prestiamoci in this moment have 2 different licenses from Bank of Italy, so we are full of license, probably the most, the operator with more licenses in the world. And, but we have, let's say, relaunched the company starting from beginning of 2014. And till today, we have, let's say, given around about 3 million euro of personal loans, and the average return that we are trying to give to our lenders is 6% net of everything. And we have, in this moment, we are, let's say, 8-9 people in the company.
Great, thanks a lot. So what we tried to do with this panel was get a mix of, first of all, to sort of expose the Southern European marketplace lending businesses to a wider audience, and then to give that audience a mix of small business lending and consumer lending, shorter term lending and longer term lending, and you know, hopefully we'll be able to have an interesting discussion about the pros and cons of each model. I think it'd be interesting for the audience now to have a little bit of discussion on the size of the opportunity here. We hear a lot about the UK being the biggest market. We hear a lot about Germany, about France. I'm not sure everybody knows how big the opportunity is in your countries. So maybe I'll start with Spain. And Josep, could you talk about how you see the size of the opportunity, and then maybe Toby, and I'm going to save another question for James a little later.
Yeah. As we all say, and in financial markets, it's always huge. In Spain, it's one of the biggest economies in Europe, and there's some big figures like 300 billion of financing of SMEs, only SMEs in Spain. So our objective is nothing, all companies to take a small part of it. And I think there is also an opportunity to grow for this sector. There is many signs for that, at least for the SMEs peer-to-business crowdlending sector, because 99.9% of companies in Spain are SMEs, and 40% of companies in Spain have less than 10 employees. So the size of the loans suitable for crowdlending are always small, under 500,000 probably. So it's a huge opportunity for that. And maybe the second interesting thing is all SMEs depend on banks excessively. Small companies depend 100% on banks, and they have to work on taking banks out of their balance sheet in order to diversify their financial sources, like in France, Germany, and England. No? So this is a great opportunity for these companies to grow in the SME sector at least.
Toby, you have a...
Yeah, Josep, I mean, you said a lot of the good points already. What I would add is there are around about 3 million MSMEs, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in Spain, and the opportunity is really gigantic, driven by the fact that banks are just not in the business of lending to those businesses. It sounds quite radical, but it really is the fact. And you know, those businesses are risky, and I think that's one of the reasons why so much attention and focus has been on Germany and the UK, and less so on Spain. But you know, what we do is we do risk-based pricing. You know, there's a price for everything, and if the risk is higher, we price that accordingly. And there are some very solid companies, and you know, I would add one more statistic, and that is probably 85% of the Spanish economy in some ways is dependent on those MSMEs. So the opportunity we see is really enormous, and it has so far been a little bit under the radar screen of a lot of the investors that have been focusing on the UK and the US largely, and I think that is definitely shifting. At least I see a lot more interest, including from US investors, on continental Europe, and Spain is a very big market in continental Europe.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just stay on that topic for a little while. And I think it's interesting that we have in this panel of Spanish platforms, we have one native Catalan platform with a Catalan CEO, and then we have a German, and then we have an English. So James, what drove you to look at this market in Spain with an Anglo-Saxon perspective?
Well, I think Spain has its strengths, but they're real economy strengths, and I see a huge virgin market, a credit market, which is well over 90% dominated by banks. And I think Spanish banks, whilst they're obviously efficient in some respects. They're not famous and known for their speed of innovation. And you see a country post-crisis which is recovering and indeed now expanding. And so the opportunity, the long-run opportunity to disintermediate, but also the short-run opportunity to lend at very attractive risk-adjusted rates was attractive to me. And I thought I could bring some good old-fashioned Anglo-Saxon skills honed and tempered by Spanish flair and maybe bring some credit to...
Yeah, I want to come back to the sort of particularities of operating in Spain or Italy. But let's switch to Italy for a second. So the Italian platforms here are consumer-focused. Maurizio, can you talk about the opportunity in the consumer
not too many
sector?
people actually know about the size of the market, but every year we have about 46 billion of loans granted in the consumer market. Out of those, 25 are personal loans, which is our market. But the most interesting figure is maybe that only 5% of those 25 billion are actually searched and finalized online, which represents about 1.3 billion. That is our immediate target market. I don't see why those guys shouldn't come to platforms like ours. And that is only the beginning. Because
Where
I mean,
are those guys borrowing? If there's
they go
$1
to
billion
regular, regular financial companies that are pretty strong in Italy with a local presence, the branching system, which is boring and old, but they still dominate in the market. So that 5% should become, I would say, 10%. Every day it should improve.
Well, you don't even need to grow that 5% if you can do a better job than those guys, right? That's a big
good point.
How do you feel about, how do you look at the market?
Oh, for sure, the market is a market that is very stable and brings a lot of value. Just an example, Compass, that is one of the 4 biggest operator, is doing every year more than 250 million of cash flow that is going to. So it's just doing this business, you know. The only problem that I see for us just to start is that due to the fact that till today have been a market very controlled from these big guys and have been controlled in a very intransparent way. To enter with a very transparent offer is something that you have also to explain to the customer. So in this moment, customers are not used to go to the web to ask for loans, so it's a very small amount of people. So to originate something good, you have really to explain why you are better, because they are used to go to someone else and to have a face-to-face discussion for the loans. So I think this is probably the most complex part of this business. Have been very intransparent compared with other countries.
How are you guys going to compete with these established consumer credit providers that are generating so much value? Is it on price? Is it on simplicity?
We try to compete on efficiency, clearly, to really transform the bad experience of having to go towards a bank officer. Actually, a bank, you should see the people that actually sell loans, intermediaries of whatever kind, and start talking about your personal life, rather than going on a website, even at midnight from your sofa, and have a credit application done in about 10 minutes. Again, the loan in 24 hours if you provide the right documentation. So I think we should really focus on that side of the business. So efficiency. Interest rates, I mentioned 9.5 APR. The average APR in Italy is about 12%. So we are cheaper in a way, but that's not the point. If somebody wants to buy a motorcycle down the corner, he wants the loan straight away. He doesn't care whether the APR is 9.5. Anyway, the installment is going to be 300 instead of 290. So what's the point?
Right. So maybe that's a good segue into credit analysis, because that's obviously one of the hearts of this business. So maybe we can go back to Spain and talk a little bit about what is the quality of the credit information that's available on SMEs or very, very small companies? What kind of data sources do you use? How does it compare to what's available, say, in the UK or in the US? Toby, do you want to start with that one?
I think it's a good question and one that might surprise some of the audience. I mean, I can also talk a little bit from my experience in the Netherlands and in Australia. Spain is by far the best when it comes to data availability and data availability in a format that we can use to automate our scoring. So in Spain, we use credit bureau information, Informa Equifax, for example. We use financial statements, which both sole traders, the autonomous as well as the limited companies, SLSAs, need to provide in a very standard fashion. So we use hardcore quarterly financial statements, which are readily available in electronic form, which is similar to the Companies House in the UK. On top of that, we have information from VAT tax authorities, all of which in electronic form, all of which available to do cross-reference checks, which helps us in our KYC AML process. So the availability of data in Spain is such that a fully automized credit decision is actually not that far away. I mean, I'd be foolish to say that you can do automatic underwriting entirely, but you can certainly do a very large extent of that with the final manual underwriting that is needed. But Spain is very, very benign and very, very efficient in that regard, and certainly way more efficient than the Netherlands and Australia, which are the two markets which I can compare Spain with.
Josep, do you have anything to add on that credit?
I totally agree. You couldn't explain it better. And what we do with all this information, at least in Arboribus, we're very small, only 4 million originated, 100 loans. So statistically, it's not relevant in order to build a rating process right now. So what we are doing is analyze it with underwriters, professional underwriters with 15 years of experience in good banks. There are always bad banks in Spain, so we take care of that. And we do it like a direct contact. Our underwriters contact directly to the company in order to analyze it and to do an approval or a denial. No? So maybe it's different from the banking system that visits the company and we do it directly. So normally the underwriters in Spanish banks don't get in contact with the company, but the commercials. So we change that in a way.
James, how about you? What's your view on the richness of the credit data, and how long does it take you guys to, say, approve a loan, to do the full credit process?
We can say no very quickly, and we can say yes to 50-60% of the applications within 4 hours of receiving the data that we need, which is very similar to the data that these guys have. It's the outliers that take a little bit more time and might take up to 48 hours. Mm-hmm. But I think Spain shouldn't be underestimated. It's got a very strong banking culture, both in consumer and commercial lending. I think what challenges we find relate more to finding independent solutions, because it is a bank-dominated environment, and finding innovative, sophisticated solutions, whether it's for data, whether it's for risk analysis, whether it's for any part of our back office. That is a bit more challenging. You often have to look overseas to find them. But piece by piece, you put your puzzle together.
Right. One of the things I found interesting in talking to you guys, and I'm not sure this is true for all the small businesses, but apparently, your average quite small business will have borrowed from 2 or 3 banks, or more, which is totally unusual, right? That they'll have 20,000 from 3 different banks, and then they'll be tapped out, and then they'll presumably come to you.
Which has led to a development in the banking sector, which is that banks are required on a periodic basis to report their exposure to consumers and to corporates, right, which is a very valuable piece of information that we can draw on in order to work out what financial borrowings a borrower has.
Yeah, and that goes to Toby's point about the transparency and the richness of the data. Can we talk, Maurizio and Michele, can you talk a little bit about, maybe we start with Michele, the credit information that you're able to access on the consumers in Italy?
But yes, the credit information that we can get are already quite good. So we have basically 2 sources of information. One is called CRIF, that belongs more or less from all the banks. And the second one is Experian, the usual one. Mm-hmm. On top of this, additional information are coming. Since this year, we have something that is called Shipafi. Is a place where more and more information from the police, from the pension, from many other sources are collected, and where you can find, for example, if there was an identity that was stolen or things like this. So the information system is already quite good. You need anyway an underwriter because it's important, in particular because you do not have like a bank the real behavior of a person, and so you have to add something, and information are improving. So I think little by little we will see more and more automatic process.
Yeah, totally agree. Italy has positive and negative information on every single person. I mean, it's a very liquid market, if you want to mention that. Clearly, the scoring that you get from Experian and CRIF is not good enough. You need to have documentation checks. Thanks to Shipafi, some of the documentation we require today is not going to need it anymore. We usually call the employer to make sure that the guy is still working there. That is, I think, no matter the automation, whatever Asian is, you still need to call the employer. And we discovered, I went last year to give about 50 police denunciation because of fraud attempts. And there were people trying to forge either the payslip or stuff like that. In terms of speed of approval, we get immediate approval, temporary approval, you get it straight away. And then if we receive all the documentation, a credit application for a loan of 5,000 can take about 15 minutes. Clearly, we need to automate that, and we are doing that for the small loans.
Yeah. Obviously one of the problems is making the origination, the onboarding of either a lender or a borrower as easy as possible. And what are the key hurdles from your perspective? Do you have all the tools that you need to do that, or are there sort of regulatory requirements about paperwork that has to be actually physical, signed physically, delivered physically, that slow this process down? So anybody want to jump in on this, because it applies to both?
No hurdles in Spain, I would say, like virtually none.
Right.
I mean, for better or for worse, the on-balance sheet lending to small businesses is entirely unregulated.
Because in Germany, you need to have a physical.
In Germany, you do. One of the reasons why we're not in Germany.
Right.
But what we've done proactively is we have received successfully so the UK FCA license, which went one step further in including sole traders in the consumer definition of the Financial Conduct Authority. Spain hasn't gone that far. We literally have no regulation to adhere to. All we need to do is follow civil law, which is pretty common sense. So the regulatory hurdles are non-existent. In terms of automation of the underwriting, we have all we need. In addition to what I described on the credit bureau side, financial statements and VAT forms, we also look at bank account history, which is extremely powerful. We also get that in electronic format through technology that we built in-house, which is similar to Yodlee in the US. It's just a lot more stable in my view, certainly if you go outside the US and the UK. So we have all we need, and which allows us to certainly reject clients automatically. Full automation is impossible. And anyone who tells me otherwise, I just don't buy it, because corporations can be so complex with intercompany loans, etc., complex corporate structures, that full automation, in my view, of business lending is not possible, but certainly 90% is.
Maurizio, you were going to react to the ease of onboarding.
Exactly. So you're a balance sheet lender, but you don't need a credit license to lend money to small institutions. Correct. In Spain?
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's good to know.
By the way,
in a way, maybe we should, yeah.
By the way, the same is the case in the Netherlands and many other countries.
Interesting.
I want to go to the regulatory question soon, but just on the paper pushing question, what's
paper,
it like?
You need to have a signed contract by the customer when he borrows or lends money. The lender only wants the borrower every time he asks for a loan, but it can be sent by a PDF and signed by PDF. So that is not such a hassle, but still worse than in the UK where you tick a box.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was an issue in particular for us, because we had also in the first version to manage a bank also where the count of lenders were positioned. But let's say in the last 6 months in Italy really started the possibility to have a digital signature. So we think that in the next 6 months we will have a completely paperless process on both sides.
Great.
So this means that the origination part should be very easy.
So let's talk about the regulatory environment, because that's obviously a concern for investors coming from outside the country. Let's stick with Italy. Where are we on peer-to-peer regulation, or what do you have to be in terms of a regulated entity to be able to be in this business? Michele?
But anyway, you must be approved from Bank of Italy. So no doubts about this. Then the question is what Bank of Italy think is the right vehicle.
Right.
Okay, and here, let's say Bank of Italy in this moment thinks that probably the easiest one is a payment institution. Nevertheless, it's clear also from Bank of Italy point of view that our business is divided mainly in two parts. One is a professional evaluation of credit, okay, and this is typical of a credit company. And the second part is management of payment flow. And this is typical of a payment institution. So the best thing should be to put together these two companies. And we are trying to go in that direction. Nevertheless, it's a direction that is very heavy. It means that probably you need to have a capital that is minimum 2 million. You need to have a lot of control, like a small bank, probably something similar to what Predunion has, and so on. So in this moment, Bank of Italy is saying more payment institution, but as soon things will get bigger, probably to be someone that is doing credit in a professional way will become more and more important.
And Maurizio, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. Is there anybody in the Italian government saying, gee, we need to do what they did in the UK, or what they've done in Spain, we need a regulatory framework, or is that years away?
No, the Bank of Italy actually specifically said, I went to a convention where they were there, that when somebody said, okay, now you have a legal framework for payment, for peer-to-peer lending into payment institutions, and they raised their hand and said, no, this is not, we didn't really actually have any legal framework for that. We thought 3 years ago, they've been pretty adventurous, I must say, that the payment institution license was the best framework to really have our activity. Having said that, I don't know if you guys read the EBA report of April of last year, where the European Banking Association was actually recommending to all central banks for all the P2P businesses in Europe to be actually under a payment institution. If you see their recommendation, what we need to do, what we are doing today is what they're required to do everywhere. Right. So I think at least, it's very cumbersome, it's very heavy, a lot of fulfillments to do every single day, but you're not going to have trouble like it could happen.
So James, can you talk a little bit about the regulatory environment in Spain?
Yeah. It's very pro-business. I think when it first appeared in draft form in 2014, it gave the sector a little bit of a shock because the first attempt was not. But it takes really three forms. One is a client monies type regulation, which derives from EU-level payment services, which is all about collecting, segregating, and protecting client funds. So they're kept separate. And therefore, investors are confident that on insolvency of a platform, were that to happen, the money would be segregated and there'd be an audit trail, which would allow authorities to follow the money home. And then there's a new regulation which comes into force in April next year, which we're all busy reorganizing ourselves in preparation for, which is more of an investor protection and a retail investor protection regulation, which is all about creating transparency, fairness, avoiding conflicts of interest, which again is very pro-business. It could have been much more restrictive, and indeed where institutional or professional investors are concerned, it's very light regulation. And then if you're a consumer lender, well, you'll have to comply with borrower protection regulation, which is pretty similar to what's required around Europe.
Great. We've got about 10 minutes left. So does anybody have any? I've got a couple of other questions, but I want to make sure if people have questions that they get a chance to ask them. Does anybody want to? I can't even see anything from here. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to get addressed by the panel before I keep going?
I have a comment. I mean, I wish
Sure.
central banks would talk to each other. I mean, it's amazing to see such a fragmentation of licenses now. The credit consumer license, we are a payment institution. It's pretty ridiculous, actually. if you need to expand international, at least the advantage of being fully regulated as a payment institution or a credit institution, like Michela was saying, is that you can passport it internationally. But rest assured that Bank of Italy especially won't let you go very freely around Europe. Before you need to go to them, even if it's only, they're supposed to give you an answer within 20 days, they still call you, you need to go and pay a visit, present a business plan, and then eventually they say, okay, you're a good guy, you may go. Yeah. But then you see these differences of treatment, which is really surprising. I mean, we're supposed to be Europe. I know we are Southern Europe, but, still part of the...
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who would agree with you that we're not quite Europe yet, especially after the recent events. We have a question over there. Thank you. The mic's coming.
Hi. I suppose it's a question for the Spanish lenders. Have you had experience in enforcing, and how has the judicial system has been kind to you when enforcing on a loan from the company perspective or on a personal guarantee perspective, if you take it, when underwriting your SME loans?
Who's the question?
Yeah, Josep, you want to try that? Enforcement?
We haven't experienced an enforcement yet, but the process is pretty clear. So it goes for a judicial procedure if the company enters in bankruptcy. So there's a lot of different ways to proceed, and there's no difference. So depends on the cause of the bankruptcy or the late payment. You might recover some of the money, and as most crowdlending platforms, we represent the best interest of our clients, of our interests, in order even to negotiate with the borrower that has entered bankruptcy in order to recover at least part of the loan, if it's the only way to do so.
James, you want to?
Well, coming from the UK, I take a slightly different view. I think the real difference perhaps that I've seen is at the level of institutions, whether it's legal system, whether it's courts, whether it's judges. And I think Spain and perhaps other countries in Europe are perhaps more consumer friendly when it comes to the crunch, when you're sat face to face in a courtroom trying to enforce a loan. And so one does have to accept that enforcement does take longer, that you may be on the receiving end of a rather arbitrary decision. And indeed, perhaps you need to set yourself up in terms of instruments, in terms of leverage, to force the borrower to the negotiating table, rather than allow him to take you for a ride.
Do you take personal guarantees on on the small business loans? Do you take personal guarantees?
On the substantial majority, it really does come down to the quality of the borrower, but we look to.
Right,
yeah.
right.
We take personal guarantees approximately in the 60% of our loans.
Personal guarantees?
Yes, personal, the owners.
Yeah.
But the truth is, these guarantees are given across the whole banking pool.
Yeah.
Right.
So your average entrepreneur in Spain is guaranteeing €500,000, €1 million worth of outstandings, and he's underwater probably in terms of his net wealth, because his real estate, his home, is probably not worth what it was. Well, it isn't worth what it was 5-10 years ago.
Right. Great.
It's difficult to say a recovery rate
right
now, because we don't have enough track record. I don't know that one of Fund and Circle and other bigger companies, but yeah, in Spain it should be very low, of course.
Does any other questions? Somebody raise their hand. So I have another question about the environment for raising venture capital. Right? Can you guys talk about that part of the equation? Because you're all, most of you are venture backed, and you have to think about that part of your business as well as the platform part. Let's see, Maurizio, you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, to start a new venture in Southern Europe, I talk about Italy, but I think it's pretty similar. I mean, the best way to do it, or I would say the only way to do it, is actually to go to your friends and family and fund the startup phase. I've been looking for funds, I'm consistently looking for new funds. And at the end, we managed to get a good size of funding recently. We're very happy about it. And guess where we found the money? In the UK. Right. So.
Yeah, what about you, James?
Well, I think in the early stage of development of any platform in the sector, it's a very capital-intensive business, and I think there's a close correlation between evolution in terms of client acquisition, whether it's investor or loan acquisition, borrower acquisition. I think there's a close correlation between that and the amount of equity you have available. I think people comment perhaps that Southern Europe's not evolving as quickly as the Anglo-Saxon world, and that in part to do with the regulatory environment, in significant part, I think, to do with the risk capital environment. It is easy to raise 50,000 euros from 10 people. It's very hard to raise €500,000 euros from 5 people.
Right.
And so the step from business angel to Series A is a very big one.
Michele, you guys have been through a fundraising recently as well.
Yeah. But in Italy, venture capital funds are like 1/10 of the rest of Europe in percentage. So it's more difficult because there is less capital. This is for sure. Our rounds in the last years have been mainly done with business angels and so on. Anyway, things are a little bit changing also there in Italy. It's not yet like other countries. And I think also if you want to go to do fundraising outside Italy, you have to show that someone in Italy is believing in what you're doing. Otherwise, so.
Yeah, great. Toby, do you want to?
Yeah, what I would add is it's definitely from where we started sort of 12 months ago, and the level of interest from investors towards Spain has changed dramatically. I think as the US and the UK becoming perhaps a little more crowded, investors, and you mentioned UK investors, are looking outside the home market, and I think that is very much the case. The level of interest from US investors in a Spanish platform such as ours has increased dramatically, and there is still a lot of potential, and perhaps more so than in the slightly more mature markets. So we've seen a lot of change over the last 12 months.
Great.
The arrival of LendIt's funding circle and the good growing figures were small, but growing in 100% per year. So I think this would change very soon. We're in the threshold of receiving probably bigger companies getting to Spain, maybe to buy other companies, or maybe foreign VCs to get interested into the market, Spanish market.
Great. Anybody have any other questions? Okay. No, well, I know one of you has to catch a plane, so I'm going to end this with 2 minutes to go. And thank you very much let's give a hand to the panelists. Thank you. Gentlemen.